The way we eat has constantly evolved, becoming richer and more innovative over time. It is adapted to our evolution, our available resources, and our dietary preferences. But a new food source could shake up our existing culinary habits. That's because recently, there's been talk about the future of our food being based on none other than insects. And that's coming from the respectable Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. In just a few decades, there will be over 9 billion mouths to feed, which means we'll have to find alternative food sources. In salads, sauces, or stews, insects are a rich source of protein, vitamins, and minerals, making them serious competitors to our more traditional steaks and roasted chickens. Not to mention producing them creates little pollution and takes up very little space. There's only one problem. We think insects are disgusting. A revulsion that has been rooted in human culture for centuries. Are we capable of overcoming our prejudices so we can actually enjoy grasshopper pasta or cricket salad?
My father started 30 years ago a chicken farm. So we always had the background of the agricultural industry. So we wanted to expand, but we didn't want to expand in more chickens, but we want to do something else. And we heard about the story of insects, so we going to did research on that. And in the end, we believed in it. So we decided to just do it. And that was actually the beginning of this farm. Okay, we're going to start here at the incubator room. It's the place where the cricket babies are getting born every day. So over here I can show you the baby crickets in this box. So as you can see here, this is all baby crickets. They are at this moment I think few hours old, so they are actually quite young. And we empty this in the morning and in the afternoon, and then we put it from there in the rearing boxes. You see, it's from 24 September. I think it's yesterday, or maybe today. And then they have the access to the feed and the water. And they also live in these cartoons, where they have the living space for themselves. Sometimes we call it cricket hotels. And yeah, from there they are staying, they are living here 37 days, so their whole life cycle. And after that we're hatching them. Okay, so over here you can see where they lay their eggs. So here in the middle we have actually a separate crate, and the crickets have by their instinct that they know they need to lay their eggs in there. I think there are getting 200,000 crickets born every day. I think it's more crickets than Dutch people here. Most of the time, when they have enough feed and enough water, they think it's nice in the crate and then they stay there. But for example, when they are missing something, when you are late with feeding the crickets, it could be that they're going to search for the feed, and then there are coming more crickets out of it. So yeah, those are escaped. The sustainable aspect, it's of course very important, because there are getting more and more people on this planet, and they all have mouths to feed. And it's just not possible to do it with the common agriculture, so the chicken, cows and pigs, because there is just not enough space to grow all the grains. We need to feed those animals to feed ourselves. But then we're coming with the other aspect that people don't like insects the first time when they see it because they think it's a little bit gross. But that is also a challenge for us to make insect products tasty and then to convince the people that this is a good choice.
Consumed by 2 billion people across the globe, in Holland, insects have been farmed as a food source for almost 20 years. And today, they're starting to make their first appearance in France. Even though they're not what we expect food to be, many people believe in their potential and have begun exploring this brand new market. They have good reason to be front and center on our dinner plates. That's because these creatures are packed with protein and are extremely sustainable. Producing 100 grams of beef requires 1 kilogram of vegetation, but it only takes 200 grams to produce 100 grams of crickets. And crickets require 20 times less water than their bovine counterparts. Producing 100 grams of mealworms creates 100 times less greenhouse gases than producing 100 grams of pork meat. A significant piece of information as we start to feel the serious impacts of global warming. But raising insects also has numerous other advantages. It requires little space, which will be an increasingly important issue to our civilization. And they grow fast, extremely fast. They're fully grown in a matter of months, while raising mammals takes several years. And despite their size, insects are highly concentrated in nutrients. A cricket, for example, contains more iron than spinach and just as many vitamins as beef. It also contains more protein than any other meat source. But despite all these advantages, locusts, crickets, and mealworms still suffer from a reputation problem. How can we make maggots and grasshoppers seem appetizing?
See, that's a nice smell. It's a little nutty, a little woody, kind of like a grain. Generally speaking, people are totally disgusted. I do think you have to convince people as a first step. And in order to convince them, you have to disguise the bugs. But as you're about to see, it's a fairly quick process. Once people have eaten a few dishes with invisible insects in them, they start to accept the idea, and eventually they branch out into eating insects wholeheartedly. Not bad at all. What we're doing is hiding the insects. This is one of the first courses. So I try to avoid psychologically shocking people when they first get here with a bug staring them straight in the eyes. Little by little, as the next dishes come out, we eventually get to the big crickets you see here. But usually, by that time, people aren't afraid anymore.
Laurent Schneider offers tasting experiences to help educate people about eating insects.
Now that's a little more challenging. This one, however, is visually beautiful.
I'm fine with that one too, but this, I just can't.
I have a question for you. Who here has eaten insects before? I'm willing to bet everyone here has done it. We actually eat between 500 grams and 1 kilogram of insects every year.
500 grams?
Insect fragments are notably found in flour, in all the cookies you buy, in chocolate, in spreads, fruit juice, and almost everything ready-made that you buy at a supermarket. That means tonight's just a normal night. I invite you to the buffet. Please begin and let us know what you think.
Oh, that one's not blended, look.
That's nothing.
That's a mushroom. No, that's not a mushroom. It's obviously a mushroom. No, I'll show you, it's not. That's a mealworm. No, look how big it is.
It's not supposed to move.
It's a mushroom, Mom. No, that's a leg. That's not a mushroom.
It's almost always the same thing. First, people are disgusted. That's everyone's initial reaction. After disgust comes fear, Am I sure I want to eat that? Are you sure that it's good? Will I get sick? But luckily, curiosity usually gets the best of them, so they decide to taste it anyway. And once they've tasted it, they rationalize it because it's delicious. So why hesitate? But going from enjoying eating insects for one night to actually eating them at home on a regular basis, that's a huge leap. But that's how it starts. You see? Were you skeptical?
When you see what it looks like,
I made it past the first dish.
the second dish will be trickier.
Yes, I did see the second dish with the ratatouille.
That's not ratatouille.
Yes, I know, it's not just ratatouille.
In other countries, people are disgusted by the fact that we eat snails and oysters. It's purely cultural. The same thing happened with other foods in the past. We all know the story of the potato, but few people know the story of the tomato, which was only eaten for the first time under Catherine de' Medici. It was just a decorative plant before that.
I do like it, but I'm the kind of person to think about what I'm eating, which makes it a little complex for me. Oh boy, I'm just gonna hide that in the... I'm gonna hide it. I'll just cover it up.
To make certain foods more popular, we have to make them appetizing. What better way to do that than to use a dish we all love and just sprinkle some little insects on it? Some bugs are visible and some are invisible.
I literally cannot put these bugs in my mouth. It's not a phobia. I just prefer them on the ground rather than on my plate. Even if they're grilled or if someone tells me they're crunchy and you don't taste anything, I just can't get past that.
Okay, now that you're all black belts in insect eating, it's time to taste crickets. Do not let what you see dissuade you. Remember what you've already experienced and let that guide you. I recommend taking the cricket, removing the wings, and then eating the whole thing.
No, I can't. No, I can't. I can't. Close your eyes. There. That was really hard. It's hard because you see its eyes. It's a long thing that looks like a dragonfly, and eating a dragonfly is scary. It's totally weird. We're just not used to it. It's a cultural thing. You just have to let yourself go with it. Forget about the fear, and then it just goes right down.
I came here out of curiosity, not really because I wanted to taste that. I didn't think I'd actually be able to do it. It was really hard to relax for the first 4. And then, interestingly, there was that cricket puree that was absolutely spectacular. It was difficult because the eyes grossed me out a little, but at the same time, it was that puree that allowed me to get a sense of the taste.
Why is it so hard for Westerners to eat insects? We are affected by neophobia. Naturally, new foods frighten us. It's an emotional response ingrained in us from our ancestors' experiences. We also inherited from them quite a few prejudices about insects, that they're ugly, dirty, and insignificant. Small creatures we can't identify with, and yet they've existed for millions of years. Roman Gourouste, a paleoentomologist at the Museum of Natural History in Paris, discovered the oldest intact insect fossil in the world. Strudiella is 365 million years old.
There's still a lot of mystery around the origin of insects. We've found insect fossils, the first of which dated from the Devonian period, which was around 400 million years ago. They're extremely rare, and they're usually in very bad shape, because we think insects back then were less resistant. They were small organisms of marine or aquatic origins that little by little began to colonize land. First on very humid soil, and then eventually they fully moved out of their moist environments to become totally terrestrial. After that came the Carboniferous period, which had a pretty well-established insect fauna that included dragonflies. Very large dragonflies began to appear, multiple lineages of them, which is what led us to believe that there have been insects on the planet for over 300 million years.
Insects appeared along with the first terrestrial plants back when the planet only comprised 3 giant continents. 80 million years later, they became the first flying creatures on the planet. Back then, they were omnipresent and above all gigantic, due to the abundance of food and the absence of predators. Centipedes could reach up to 2 meters, and dragonflies could get up to 80 centimeters in size. But when vertebrates appeared, insects began to shrink. In the Permo-Triassic Age, some 250 million years ago, they evolved and metamorphosized. Later, in the Cretaceous period, pollination started occurring, which made insects indispensable for plant reproduction.
The Permian period was extraordinary in part because fossils are rare, so it takes a lot of time to find any. It took me about 10 years from the moment I set out to try to find insects and traces of fossils from the Permian period, here in this region of Central Var in southern France, until I found my very first triops, my first fossilized crustaceans. That led to organized digs, and that's when we found the insects. It's a little miraculous because zones like this extended to dozens and dozens of hectares, and in the end, this is the spot where we found them. Here, a beautiful triop. Triops are a true indicator of life in these extremely ancient temporary ponds. They're a testament to the small aquatic ecosystem that was here, which led to insects. The bottoms of these ponds also usually reveal animal tracks from other arthropods, but also from reptiles. What did lizards eat back then? Most likely insects. So if we find traces of lizards, we'll also find what they were eating.
Insects began to spread and diversify into more than 1 million different species. Throughout our evolution, they've represented up to 80% of all living species. In all likelihood, our hunter-gatherer ancestors must have tried to see what they tasted like.
Insects are such an abundant resource. If you think about it, they're an obvious and practical food source. Once we got to know them, once we were adapted to our environment, we must have been familiar with the insects that were present. One can easily conclude that insects were a key resource, and it's very probable that prehistoric man made use of them, and most likely in excess. It's even conceivable that mankind's evolution was made possible by the consumption of insects.
That means eating insects would be a return to our roots. With no formal proof, one could consider primate behavior a valuable clue. Squirrel monkeys are known to eat insects as high-protein snacks, while chimpanzees, the monkeys we resemble the most, even developed tools for reaching the most inaccessible insects. Insects have hence long been part of our food supply. But in the Western world, numerous other abundant resources began to slowly change our eating habits. In the Neolithic period, man started settling down and began farming and agriculture. That's when our relationship with insects began to fade away. The Bible tells of insects in 3 of the 10 plagues that affected Egypt. One of the most well-known, the 8th plague, describes locusts that allegedly covered the face of the ground and devoured every tree that was growing in the fields. Thousands of years later, insects are still held to this stereotype.
Insects rob mankind of 1/3 of our assets. We study our very enemies. We carefully measure their reactions to insecticides using methods based on radioactivity. This is an enemy that we must kill, otherwise it will kill us.
The real war on insects started at the end of the 19th century with the advent of the first insecticides. Whether natural, like nicotine, or things like heavy metals, like arsenic, for example, that began to grow after World War I, when we used that same war mentality and technologies against insects to create industrial insecticides. DDT, for example, was a direct result of war methods and of war prophylaxis. It's a pretty recent thing to want to exterminate insects. The desire may have been there before, but we couldn't actually do it, so it just never happened.
Who does the Earth really belong to? To our insect rivals, which spread suffering and death? Destroying the fruits of our labor, eating the food we need and severely lack? At the end of the day, who will master the earth? Insects or mankind?
Seen as destructive, damaging, and the cause of dramatic plagues, insects became a target that man aimed to destroy. It's estimated we've killed 80% of the planet's insects in just 30 years.
Something I've noticed as a long-time entomologist is that you just don't see bumblebees anymore. Just 15 years ago, there would have been 3 or 4, 10, 15 bumblebees foraging these flowers. It's proof that even in my garden, which is made for insects, they're disappearing. There's more of them here than in the surrounding areas, but they're still sadly disappearing nonetheless. Insects are small creatures that are victims of mankind's tendency to be uninterested in anything that doesn't resemble our kind. And obviously, insects are pretty far down that list. Of course, it's easy to see why insects, like big, colorful butterflies or beautiful iridescent beetles or crickets and grasshoppers that make music, or large dragonflies, are all far more popular than the little things swarming in the dirt. Yet they do essential work for humans, even if we can't see it. There's a lack of understanding about how their world functions, so we only see insects that annoy us, mosquitoes that bite, wasps and bees that sting, caterpillars that eat our cabbage, etc. It's a form of schizophrenia to have people saying how much they love butterflies, but then spray their gardens to rid them of caterpillars.
There's no pity for insects, which are often villainized. Terrifying monsters in the movies. Objects of disgust or dread. Ugly creatures with no value that we can exterminate without an ounce of guilt. Eating insects? What a joke to the Western world, as seen in this famous clip from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Give me your hat. Why? Because I'm going to puke in it. Oh.
Seen as poor or primitive people's food, eating insects is often only done as a challenge in front of a half-amused, half-disgusted audience. After centuries of defamation, can the insect's reputation still be saved? Today, advertising agencies and businesses are resorting to creative work to make them more popular. From color to a touch of humor to modern branding. By making their way to our dinner plates, insects may finally have a chance at a cultural comeback.
Jimini's initial marketing strategy was to immediately force consumers to confront the reality of the situation, meaning we never tried to hide the insects. We owned up to that from the start. We saw that people eat shrimp and oysters, and nothing looks worse than an oyster. Then we downplayed it. We adapted the tone of our communication with wording and expressions that were very, very particular. If you have ants in your pants, have a cricket. Or early bird catches the worm, and so should you, and so on. They all gave the consumer very direct context, which I describe as educational, friendly, and approachable. We didn't want to greenwash people or make it seem sensationalist, like eat insects now, because in 2050 there will be no more food. We didn't want to be alarmist. We focused on the idea of sharing. We wanted something educational, fun, and uncomplicated. So we decided to start with appetizers, because you don't usually eat appetizers alone, and we thought that was friendly and fun. We want to focus on younger generations who don't already have that cultural block ingrained in them. Young people who grow up thinking that eating insects is fine and who just start eating them naturally. That's how it could eventually become part of their daily habits. Once you've opened that door in the mind of the consumer, you want to build repeat customers. That's why we then launched protein bars for starters. They're made with a base of ground-up insect powder. Then we launched granola, which is good for breakfast or as a snack. And next, we made amazing pasta. And that's easy. All you have to do is eat pasta. No need to add meat. You have all the protein you need. At Jimini's, the next upcoming product is InSteak. InSteak is our version of a ground beef substitute, made from a mix of insect and vegetable proteins. The product is actually in the prototype phase, meaning you can already eat it. We've already tasted it. It's pretty good, and we hope to commercialize it soon, because after creating it, you have to actually produce it, and that's a whole other step. Bastien and I created the company from scratch with nothing in place. We tried to outsource parts of it, saying that we had no agribusiness experience, but we couldn't find anyone because it was too new. How do you preserve an insect's flavor? Do you dehydrate it or store it fresh, etc.? So it was really challenging. We built a process from the ground up, working hand in hand with formulation laboratories and different organizations to meet sanitation guidelines and so on. We needed professionals who could adapt their machines to meet our needs, which, in the case of insects, meant adapting to their extremely light weight. It's not easy to weigh and package such lightweight insects with precision. We're talking milligrams here, so everything had to be created from scratch, which resulted in us having relatively high production costs. We still haven't fully tapped into large volume economies of scale. 5 years ago, we started with a few hundred kilograms, and today we produce tens of tons a year. So of course, that lowered production costs, which is also reflected in the cost for consumers when they buy these products in stores. The prices have already dropped considerably, a trend that's going to continue. The market is growing so fast that it's been doubling in size each year for the past 5 years.
Even if businesses seem confident, there are still a few challenges to overcome before this industry can truly shine.
Something I see as a problem, personally, as an entomologist, is the economics of the process. Meaning, yes, we can produce insect-based proteins designed for human consumption, but at what cost? And will that be competitive with other protein sources? That's the real problem.
At this moment, we're break-even. So we're not losing money, but we're also not getting big amounts of money into our bank account. There are coming Thailand crickets into Europe. So the cricket market in Thailand is much more mature because it's a longer industry there. So they can also produce the crickets cheaper than here in Europe because it's more mature. And they are dumping now also the cricket powder or the cricket products into the European market. So we also have to adapt to that we also need to decrease with our prices.
Companies have to invent everything, which is a huge investment without any guarantee of ever reaching mass production. That's because the French administration is still skittish, only allowing whole insects to be commercialized for human consumption. France is awaiting a full scientific study before it can greenlight insect-based powder foods such as flour or pasta.
Government officials, whose job it is to enforce rules and regulations or make decisions pertaining to our food supply, are people like you and me. So, of course, there can be personal hesitations associated with insects being a little disgusting or weird, which is why some of these officials often forbid them without any further thought. That doesn't help us, of course, but one could reasonably argue that the stomach or the metabolism of people in Belgium, where eating insects was made legal back in 2013 already, isn't that different from the metabolism of French people. There's really no reason why they should be available in every supermarket in Belgium and in Spain as well, but unauthorized in France, where they're deemed dangerous.
Faced with this embargo, French companies have turned to another market that's less regulated: livestock feed. Our farm animals consume a lot of resources indeed. Almost 1/4 of fish caught annually go to livestock, and 33% of the planet's farmland is used to produce food for livestock.
60 years ago, when my father-in-law started fish farming, there were no food suppliers. So how did he feed his trout? Well, he used animal byproducts. He went to Ardèche, Artois, Dronne, by day, by night, on weekends, and he would pick up dead animals. Those in good shape went to butchers who prepared everything, ground it all up, and he fed that to the trout. The bits that were bad, he left for the flies, which led to maggots, and those maggots were then fed to the fish. So raising flies to feed trout isn't new. It's been around for a very long time. The problem with fish meal for farm fishing is that we're not allowed to use anything else these days. Ever since mad cow disease, you can't use land animal proteins. So the only animal proteins you can introduce into a fish's food supply, which, let us not forget, is a carnivore, is fish meal. So people criticize us for using a marine resource to farm fish, but today's laws prevent us from using anything else, so we're a bit stuck. That's why it's not a bad idea to raise flies to feed trout. That would definitely reduce our industry's pressure on global marine resources. We can't forget about marine resources, since we depend on them, but that's because we don't have a choice. There's not much else we can use. That observation is why I contacted Christophe Trespouche at Mutatek. I was trying to find living larvae.
At this pilot farm, a lot of hope rests on a tiny insect, the black soldier fly larvae. Here, Christophe and Jérôme have kicked off raising this tropical insect, found today on every continent, which is mostly known for feasting on the residues of decomposing matter.
What we're trying to do here is inspired by what nature does all on its own. It's really just biomimicry. In nature, when you have organic waste, like fruit that fell to the ground or the like, there are larvae and worms that take it over. Maggots get inside it, and they consume the rotten fruit, which is just rotting on the ground. Then shortly after, a bird comes along and eats a larvae. And then another animal comes along and eats the bird, etc. That's what we're trying to reproduce. What we do is collect waste residue, or organic agricultural byproducts, like damaged fruit that's removed from production chains, or scraps from the fruit juice facilities, things of that nature. We feed that to a specific insect larvae. That insect is the black soldier fly, which comes from a large maggot, which then consumes all of the organic waste residue. We then collect the larvae and transform them into usable products destined for animal consumption, specifically for aquaculture fish and poultry. We're really just trying to scale up what already takes place in nature. The idea is to create an ecosystem loop on a large scale.
We built two parallel rearing basins using the same configuration. They're each 4 cubic meters with a circulating flow rate of 1 liter per second, with the same number of fish at the start, which we weighed at the beginning. That way we could measure and compare the growth rate associated with the two food sources. Our usual food source is a 50–60% organic fish meal combined with grains. The other food source uses ground-up black soldier fly meal instead of the fish meal. The goal is simply to see if the food source with the fly in it performs better or worse than what we usually use in regular rearing conditions. After about 2–2.5 months, we'll compare the feed conversion, which is the quality of food required for a certain amount of growth, and the resulting fish. Then there will be a phase where the fish will be tasted by award-winning chefs to see if there's a difference in the fish's organoleptic qualities, meaning taste, texture, and color. We want to see if what we feed the fish impacts their organoleptic qualities, if it changes anything, whether good or bad. So, stay tuned.
This is the reproduction station, where we raise adults and collect their eggs for the part of the process. So here we collect larvae that transform into what's called a pupa. The larvae becomes immobile, dark, and hard, and stays that way for about 10 days before it molts and an adult fly emerges from the larvae. This is a very intimate part of the breeding, and we spent an incredible amount of time on mastering it. But it's been pretty easy so far. It's been going well. All of this depends on us being able to raise significant quantities, because we're trying to breed on a large scale. We have to deal with things like sickness or cycle variations, etc. Things we can't always control or understand why they happen in the first place. All the other forms of breeding, whether it's cattle, goats, or chicken, are ancient. Man has hundreds of years of experience with them, in addition to the last 40 to 50 years, which have yielded very precise scientific studies. Not us. We have to invent everything from scratch, and we only have a few years to do so.
Successfully raising insects depends on a keen sense of observation and your unique capacity to understand if they're doing all right, or understanding if there's a problem. That could be a parasite, some of which can be spotted with the naked eye. We ask ourselves the same questions as traditional breeders. This also encompasses the animal's well-being, which is actually a relatively new way of thinking. We're not subject to the same rules and regulations as livestock. You can't really compare a maggot to a bird, or really to any other bigger mammal. We have a team of entomologists, and we've had a lot of conversations around their sensibility and sensitivity to pain. Today, that's something we have to think about. And honestly, that's not really been something of central concern in this sector, which is still brand new.
In France, an insect's legal status is a gray zone. There are strict laws in place for raising and slaughtering animals meant for consumption, but should those same laws apply to these practically indecipherable creatures? And if in the future, insect-based foods are produced on a large scale, would the same kinds of administrative, sanitary, and ethical guidelines apply to these creatures that currently have no status or place in our society?
If we find ourselves producing insects for animal or human consumption at the scale we currently have for the industrial farming of pigs, for example, the same sorts of ethical questions will come up. However, it's still different for insects, because notions like the amount of space required for proper development doesn't apply to many insect species. Things that could pose a problem are how they are killed, which is currently pretty violent. For example, traditionally, cultures that use insects in the kitchen prepare them the same way we prepare lobster, which is by placing them into boiling water while they're still alive. There's no ethics in that type of traditional death. So that perhaps is an area where we may need to set up regulations that are backed up by science. Whether insects feel emotions has only recently been studied and debated. We shift between two opposing perspectives. On one hand, we have an anthropomorphism, which believes that insects have the same emotions we do, meaning insects feel fear, joy, and have a maternal instinct to raise their larvae, etc. And on the other hand, we think of them as pure machines, Descartes' animal machine, which holds that insects only react to instincts. Some insects have a positive phototropism and are thus attracted to light, like caterpillars. If you leave one in a glass tube and leave it in the sun, it will climb to the top of the tube and stay in full sunlight until it dies. It won't turn back to the bottom of the tube. So certain entomologists believe they feel no pain because they react that way. Those who believe they feel emotions argue that in nature, the glass tube doesn't exist, so the animal doesn't have the evolutionary experience to understand it's a dead end and it should turn back. We see insects slam against the glass of our homes because there are no windows in nature. They just follow the light, since there are usually no obstacles. Some insects, like the maggot, and this has been proven, have the same sorts of neurons as we do, which allow sensations of pain to travel through our nervous system. Therefore, the insect does feel something that resembles what a human would describe as pain. Can we call it pain, though? The debate continues, and I think it's long from over, since we can't communicate with insects, so we don't know what they're feeling. We can only interpret, and interpretations, as we know, are always subject to debate.
Historically, it was even thought that animals like bees, other insects, do not even have basic nociception. That is a more reflex-like response to potentially an injuring or a potentially injuring stimulus. So there are classic reports or quotations, for example, by a Nobel laureate, Carl von Frisch, who claimed that when a bee is happily sucking nectar, you can take a pair of scissors and cut off her abdomen and she won't even respond to that stimulus. So the claim there was that not even that they don't have pain, but they don't even have a reflex-like response to a damaging stimulus. That, of course, is nonsense. So anyone who's ever witnessed, say, an insect, a grasshopper, or indeed an earthworm being impaled on a fishing hook will know that they resist that sort of treatment with the same kind of vigor that a human being might when they're impaled on a hook. So clearly there is basic nociception. That you can measure. the extent to which an animal tries to get away from a potentially harmful stimulus. It's interesting to know that the stimulus or one stimulus for bees to engage in such attacks is alarm pheromone. So if their hive is attacked, some of the bees will register that and spread a scent in the air that tells other bees there's a threat, we're under attack, and which provokes other bees to counterattack and to find the potential threat. So what people have found is that if bees are exposed to this alarm pheromone, they're actually less likely to have a pain-like response. So they seem to be flooding their system with an endogenous painkiller as a result of smelling the alarm pheromone, which of course is indicative that there is some sort of awareness of a threat of injury, but that this awareness and the potential fear associated with it is ameliorated by an endogenous substance that functions as a painkiller.
Lars Chitka is specialized in bumblebee behavior. His team is trying to understand the cognitive capacities of this insect.
Okay, welcome to the bee lab. You can see some young scientists in action, as well as some bees learning things. The nest naturally would be in a cavity, in an abandoned mouse hole, for example, where a single queen starts a nest in spring and then starts to lay eggs and raise their young. And once she has some workers of her own, they will take on the foraging activities. And the tunnel is the equivalent of the mouse hole tunnel in the natural world. And these boxes are what we call our flight arenas. That's where we present them with various types of artificial flowers and puzzle boxes, which the bees then have to learn about.
Here, the bees learn to count, manipulate simple objects, and solve puzzles. It turns out they are incredibly intelligent. Not only are they capable of finding solutions, but also transmitting them to their peers so they can learn too. During one of their scientific studies, the team made an astonishing finding.
So we began becoming interested in the subject in a study where we exposed bees to simulated spider attacks. So the prediction for a reflex-like robotic insect pollinator would be, okay, if they get attacked by a spider, then of course they register that attack and try to get away, but that ends there. But what we found instead was an indication that the bees' whole behavior changed after such a crab spider attack, in that they didn't just fly away from the flower, but they would then subsequently fly more slowly and inspect every flower very carefully before landing on the flowers. And this behavior change lasted for more than 24 hours after an attack. So there was a long-lasting behavior change. But moreover, they didn't just inspect the flowers for longer, but they also behaved as if they were seeing ghosts. So often they inspected the flower, and even if there was no crab spider hidden on it, they'd fly away again, as if they thought, oh, this doesn't look quite safe. And that was already an indication of there being long-lasting behavior changes as a result of a scary experience, which is more equivalent to an emotion-like state in vertebrates or humans than the predictions that would arise from just a reflex-like robotic behavior. There's no way to judge emotions objectively, even in other humans. So all we can do is measure a variety of observable behavioral responses that would be indicative of emotional states in us, but the judgment is always an indirect one. But the more evidence we can accumulate from both psychology and behavior, as well as physiology, neural stages, hormonal stages, then of course the more comprehensive a picture we get on the potential emotion-like states.
This stunning hypothesis led the scientists to create another experiment. They used 2 fake flowers, a blue one where the bees would find a 30% sugar solution, and a green one that only contained water. The team trained their bumblebees to memorize the two flowers. The bees flocked to the blue flowers and gradually abandoned the green one. Later, the scientists introduced a third flower in between the blue and the green flower. It was turquoise. When faced with this new option, the bees hesitated, unsure whether this strange new flower had food to offer them. They quickly abandoned it. The scientists then gave some of the bees a little sugar water before letting them enter the box. Here, the bee rushes to the blue flower, ignores the green one, and then immediately tries the new turquoise flower. All the bees that received a snack inspected the new flower without hesitation. The sugar water made them more optimistic. Even if the concept of emotion should be taken with a grain of salt, insects are not the stupid robots we thought they were. Integrating insects into our food is still a valuable alternative to consider when trying to reduce our impact on the environment and respond to our global food crisis. But we need to quickly adopt a clear, moral position with regard to insects. We should recognize their value, intelligence, and beauty. Because our meals are really just a reflection of our relationship with nature.